speaker takes a line from a movie, My Big Fat Greek Wedding, and has taken that now into his speech title. He's really practicing. He's been a district governor, he's been in Toastmasters since the beginning of time, and he's trying to fool us now with an icebreaker. But Eddie Merla this morning is going to talk from the Competent Communicator's Manual. So this is an icebreaker speech. In your comments to Eddie, please recognize that this is an icebreaker, and that's his purpose this morning. His title, as you might guess it, My Big Fat Ugly Icebreaker.
Have you ever seen something so ugly it made you cry? If you answered no, then you obviously didn't see my icebreaker speech. That was ugly. Imagine a grown man whimpering with fear as he makes his way to the lectern. Ugly. Imagine that same man so terrified that he was absolutely convinced that he would be the first person ever to spontaneously combust giving his icebreaker speech. Ugly. Imagine an icebreaker speech so bad that the best thing the evaluator could say about that speech was that it was interesting. Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, my big, fat, ugly icebreaker began about 3 weeks before I gave that speech. It started with these words. Sure, I can give an icebreaker. At that specific moment, I met my little friends, my amygdala. These are the fear sensors in the human brain. And they quickly decided what to do with this word icebreaker. They realized icebreaker was something to fear. And they sent a signal to my primitive, barbaric reptile brain. And my reptile brain geared into action. It forced my heartbeat up. It constricted my breathing. It opened up all of my sweat glands at the same time. Pretty ugly. Now, as I decided to move forward, what do I do with this particular speech? What do I do? Where do I go from here? Well, one thing that I learned is that as I decided and consciously thought about my icebreaker speech, that primitive, barbaric lizard brain, reptile brain, took over my entire thought process. In fact, it came up with a voice of its own. Eddie, you got to give that icebreaker speech. I was jealous. It had found a voice before I had found a voice. It would even had a mind of its own. As I was driving, minding my own business, I heard a sound. Icebreaker. And it took control. And it sent me into shock. The brain took over and totally took control of everything I could possibly do, everything I could think of. Now, when this voice would come up at times, most inopportune times, one time I was at the Starbucks and I was about to order and reptile voice spoke up. Let me order, Eddie. No. Please, let me order, Eddie. No. Man, I like to order an icebreaker with vocal variety, gestures, a few pauses, and sprinkle in some humor. Reptile voice. But then, worse, taking it worse, my nightmares. In my nightmares, reptile took over. In my nightmares, I dreamt of giving my icebreaker speech before a Toastmaster meeting for mass murderers. Charlie Manson was the all counter. He opted for an axe instead of the bell. Hannibal Lecter gave us the word of the day. decapitate. And everybody used it properly except for me. And the reason for that was I was too distracted by Charlie, because he had this swastika on his forehead. I woke up from a cold sweat as Charlie aimed his axe at me. And I woke up and realized I need help. Well, I made an urgent call to the other part of my brain. The thinking part, the more intelligent part, called the cerebral cortex. And the cerebral cortex reached out and says, don't worry, Eddie. It's just a speech. A simple, simple speech. Calm down. Don't worry. Read books. And I did. I read books. But of course, none of the advice worked. Some of the advice was, it's an icebreaker speech, so just talk about myself. For me, that was a horrible topic. See, I've reinvented myself so many times, I don't really know who I am anymore. Now, the other thing I decided to do in cerebral cortex helped me with was trying to define how to find my topic. I finally wrote something. I'm not sure how, but I finally wrote something. Then I struggled with how was I going to deliver the speech. Again, I went to the books. Cerebral cortex helped me again. And I tried all the tricks. They suggested practice in front of a mirror. Terrible advice. Even cerebral cortex had some doubts. As I looked in that mirror, cerebral cortex said, now, would you want an icebreaker speech from that guy? We moved on. Gestures. Oh, gestures. Looking in the mirror at gestures for your first time, you're in for a shock. My gestures look something like this. And I decided, in fact, reptile brain decided for me, no gestures. Grip the lectern. And that's what I did. Ultimately, I gave that icebreaker speech, and yeah, it was ugly. Very, very ugly. But I learned a valuable lesson from the entire process, and that's this. Behind every big, fat, ugly icebreaker is a Toastmaster willing to come out. Behind every big, fat, ugly icebreaker is a voice needing to be heard. Behind every big, fat, ugly icebreaker is fear. And behind every fear is something that needs to be understood. Behind our greatest fears are our greatest strengths, our most important stories, and our greatest victories. And who knows? Who knows? Someday, someone may give a big, fat, ugly icebreaker that actually may make me cry. I'm looking forward to that day. Mr. Toastmaster.